I stared at the pay stub in my hand for a full 10 seconds before I realized I wasn't breathing. 75 cents an hour. Not a typo. Not a misprint. Not a practical joke, though it might as well have been. 75 cents per hour. That's what they'd decided I was worth. Not even enough to cover a cup of gas station coffee, let alone the dignity of a grown man working 56 hours a week in the freezing backroom of a corporate warehouse that had the audacity to call itself a family. The paper crinkled between my fingers. The weight of it felt unreal, like monopoly money or a prop from some low-budget satire about late-stage capitalism. Except this wasn't a joke. This was my life. I looked up, and there he was. Brandon, Director of Operations, Company Golden Boy, hair gelled to Wall Street perfection, standing by the breakroom doorway like he'd been waiting for me to find it. His smirk was surgical. Guess we finally aligned your pay with your performance, huh? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My ears were ringing. Somewhere in the fluorescent-lit void of that breakroom, the vending machine let out a mechanical sigh, like it too was tired of being surrounded by this brand of rot. He stepped closer, the smell of cheap cologne and power imbalance following him like a fog. Some people, he said, voice syrupy with condescension, aren't even worth minimum wage. But look at you, still showing up. That's loyalty. He winked. Or desperation. I felt something hot crawl up my spine. Not embarrassment. No, I was long past that. This was different. This was molten. Controlled. The kind of rage that doesn't scream, doesn't flinch, doesn't knock over tables. It bides time. It memorizes every syllable, every smirk. It stores everything like data in a hard drive labeled for later. He walked off whistling. I sat down on the breakroom bench, staring blankly at my phone screen. Opened my banking app. Saw the deposit. $43.50 for the entire week. I laughed once. A dry, breathless sound. That wasn't enough to cover my mother's insulin. Not even close. She had 3 weeks worth left. For if we rationed, but that came with its own risks. And I'd already sold my guitar, my second monitor, the watch she gave me when I turned 25, and my old PS4 to scrape together her last round of meds. I didn't even own a microwave anymore. What else could I sell? I glanced at the wall. A motivational poster read, "Be the change you want to see in the world." A cat dangled from a tree branch beneath it. Hang in there. I wanted to set the entire room on fire. Instead I stood, clocked back in. The scanner beeped like a gunshot every time I passed a barcode. My hands moved automatically, boxing other people's luxuries with precision and speed. Brandon's voice echoed in my skull with every package I taped shut. Some people aren't even worth minimum wage. You're not a person to them. You're a calculation. You're a controllable liability. You're a bad joke in a group chat. I didn't say anything to my coworkers. I didn't rant. Didn't throw things. I stayed silent, watching and listening. But something had shifted. Something clicked into place in that moment, like a mechanism being armed. A part of me they hadn't met yet. A part even I had kept locked in the basement of my personality, opened its eyes. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened spreadsheets, old onboarding documents, internal policy PDFs, a little folder I'd made 6 months ago titled CYA, Cover Your Ass, filled with screenshots, time-stamped videos, emails forwarded to a dummy account. Things most people deleted. I wasn't most people anymore. Brandon had humiliated me in public. He had laughed at me, mocked me while my mother's health circled a drain I couldn't afford to unclog. He thought this was over, that I'd take the insult like I took everything else, quietly, obediently, like a dog that's forgotten it has teeth. But I wasn't a dog. I was a fuse, and they'd just lit it. The next morning, I walked into the HR office like a man who still believed in systems. The room smelled like lavender sanitizer and quiet betrayal. Sandra, the HR rep, sat behind her desk tapping her nails against a pink Yeti tumbler. She didn't look up when I entered, just waved me toward the opposite chair like I was an appointment she already regretted booking. I slid my stub across the desk. "There's been a mistake," I said, polite. Too polite. My paycheck shows 75 cents an hour. She finally looked at me. and for a second her face twitched like she might register shock or concern. But it passed. She clicked her mouse twice, pulled up a spreadsheet, and said without looking, "Payroll was processed according to your reclassification status." I blinked. Reclassification. Temporary role shift. You were moved from full-time operations to backroom support. That rate reflects your category. My jaw locked. That's not in my contract. She smiled a smile I'd seen before, on DMV clerks, HOA board members, and waiters telling you the kitchen's closed. A smile that doesn't even hide the lie because the lie is the smile. "We reserve the right to adjust compensation during departmental restructuring," she said. "It's in the handbook." I never signed off on that. She sipped from her tumbler. Brandon did. My voice dropped half an octave. "So you're telling me this isn't a clerical error? You're telling me someone deliberately dropped my pay to 75 cents an hour?" Her eyes darted, just briefly, to the door, then back to the screen. "It was signed off by your manager." "Brandon." She nodded once sharply, like she was ending a meeting instead of escalating a war. I stood up slower than I needed to. Rage has weight when it's being chained down by clarity. When I walked out, I passed Brandon in the hall. He was leaning against the wall next to the new vending machine, charming some intern from finance whose name he absolutely didn't know. Our star employee," he said with a grin. "You ask HR for a raise?" I didn't answer. I just stared at him. That slow, lidless stare you give to something venomous you're not ready to kill yet. He winked and added, "You're still clocking in though. That's the spirit. Loyalty like that can't be bought." The intern laughed awkwardly. And that was the moment. The one they always talk about in stories, like it's a lightning strike. But it wasn't that. It was quieter. Like a muscle tearing one slow fiber at a time. I wasn't just angry. I was done. Done playing by the rules they wrote in pencil and enforced in stone. Done asking nicely for things they stole in broad daylight. Done being the punchline in a joke I never agreed to. Back at the break room, I stood in line behind the same co-workers I saw every day. Sarah from packing, Mike from inbound, Andre from returns. They all gave me that look. The one you give to a man who just got publicly castrated, but somehow still showed up. Pity with a pinch of fear. Nobody said anything. Not out loud. But the coffee machine whispered, "That's the guy Brandon screwed. I heard he's still working at that rate? Damn. I'd quit." I didn't turn around. Didn't call them cowards. I knew why they were silent. Same reason I had been. Rent. Kids. Sick parents. Student loans. All those invisible leashes wrapped around our throats like ties. But I wasn't leashed anymore. Not inside. I went home that night and opened the file folder I'd started years ago and never had the guts to finish. Failsafe. Inside. Time-stamped footage of Brandon giving directives to cut corners on safety inspections. Screen captures of internal chats where he mocked HR policies, bragged about ghost employees on payroll. Audio clips. A spreadsheet titled Personal Favor Hours with mysteriously approved overtime bonuses. One document labeled Confidential, Supplier Kickbacks 2023. All collected slowly, like a digital drip for. I hadn't even realized how much I'd compiled until it was all staring back at me. I started crafting the outline. Not a rant. Not a complaint. A plan. No one was coming to save me. No union, no watchdog, no magic whistleblower hotline. Just me, a burner laptop, and a folder full of matches. They thought I'd just take it. They thought wrong that IT started 5 years ago. Or maybe longer. You never really know when you begin plotting the destruction of a system until you're already neck-deep in its blueprint. Fingers stained with the ink of its internal rot. I wasn't always angry. That came later. What came first was observation. I was just the night guy back then. Not officially, of course, but nobody wanted to stay past 6 p.m., so when systems crashed or the payroll app stalled at 3:12 a.m. the night before direct deposit, I was the one dragging myself back into the office in sweats and a hoodie, breathing through the burnt coffee haze and logging in as admin_override. That was when I started noticing things. Vendor invoices that didn't match. Time clocks that could be manipulated with a USB key and 30 seconds of distraction. Inventory mismatches that somehow always resolved in the boss's favor. Executive bonuses hard-coded into monthly reports under vague labels like Q3 Momentum Incentive or Leadership Stability Budget. It wasn't just sloppiness. It was design. I never reported it. Reporting means exposure, and exposure means trust. I had neither to give. What I did have was access. One night, while resolving a payroll sync error, I rewrote a minor script in the reporting database, just a silent tweak. It allowed me to shadow duplicate any entry tagged as manager override without triggering the audit system. Another night, I patched a scheduled backup task that copied specific folders to an external drive. Except I routed a second copy to a hidden partition on the shared server, encrypted with a key only I knew. I didn't use these tools. Not then. I just built them. Like a squirrel stashing acorns that might one day taste like justice. They called me quiet. The guy in IT who never talks. What they didn't know is that silence is a scalpel. And I'd spent years carving pressure points into the company's guts, never drawing blood, just noting where the arteries ran. One night I sat in the server room while the office lights flickered through the glass, like an aquarium of stressed-out fish. I had just rewritten the routing path for quarterly report backups. A single line of code that looked like a memory leak unless you knew what it was. As I finished, I remember thinking, don't touch it. Not yet. Because I wasn't angry enough. Not yet. They hadn't earned the reckoning. But I knew, deep down like a cold fact behind my ribs, that the day would come. The day they'd make it personal. The day they'd look me in the eye, smirking, and say something like, some people aren't even worth minimum wage. It wasn't paranoia. It was inevitability. Every time someone got fired for no reason, every time a department was restructured, so an executive's nephew could play manager, every time Brandon laughed at a nervous intern, I saw the countdown tick lower. And now, in the present, staring at the laughable pay stub and the HR wall of shrugs, I knew what I was really looking at. Checkmate in progress. Because the backdoors weren't bugs. They were invitations. I had set the board years ago. All I needed was the right move to start the endgame. It was a Tuesday. Of course it was. Tuesdays are when middle managers feel powerful, like the week has stretched far enough from Monday to justify arrogance, but not yet close enough to Friday to warrant restraint. Brandon called the entire ops floor into conference room B, the one with the warped projector screen and flickering overhead light, always half a second from burning out, just like the people beneath it. I sat in the back, hands folded, eyes blank. My paycheck stunt had already made the rounds. I could feel the stares, not sharp like knives, but soft and bruising, pity mixed with resignation. The kind of looks you give roadkill you can't stop for. Brandon swaggered in 5 minutes late with his usual Starbucks in hand, acting like he'd just solved world peace between bites of a dry blueberry muffin. Behind him was the CFO, an empty suit with a dental smile and a spreadsheet addiction. They were here for team realignment updates. Which meant someone was about to get screwed. We're entering a season of lean innovation, Brandon announced, clapping his hands like a kindergarten teacher bribing kids with cookies. And that means some of us, he locked eyes with me, need to embrace being part of the solution instead of expecting to be the solution. The room went still. Take our friend in the back, he said, pointing straight at me like I was a show-and-tell item. Still clocking in. Still loyal. That's admirable. Pause for effect. But sometimes, he continued, tone dipping into theater, gratitude means accepting where you're needed, even if that means a less competitive rate. A few people chuckled nervously. I didn't blink. And if that ever feels unfair, he said, smiling with full crocodile teeth, remember, scraps are still better than nothing. And some people don't even deserve that. I felt something inside me stop. Not break. Stop. A clean, hard click. Like the moment a lock disengages. Or a safety switch gets flipped. I stood up, slowly. Calm. No dramatic outburst. No retort. I nodded once and walked out of the meeting without a word. Behind me someone muttered, damn. But I wasn't listening. My ears were filled with the sound of internal systems revving up. Not metaphorically, literally. The image of my laptop at home. The encrypted drive. The the scripts sitting dormant like sleeper cells in enemy territory. By the time I reached my desk, I had already pulled the burner laptop from the back of my locker. No one noticed. I looked like any other employee having a bad day, but my hands moved with precision. Calm. Absolute. First move, initiate scrapetrigger.v3, a script built years ago that quietly accessed the internal documentation server, duplicated every executive contract, NDA, vendor agreement, and expense report going back 6 fiscal years. It looked like a system ping. Nothing more. Second move, batch encrypt the stolen data and sync it to 3 offsite mirrors. One to a cloud drive hidden in a dead email account, one to a private VPS in Iceland, and one onto a flash drive in my back pocket. Third move, initiate the decoy. I sent a fake support ticket to IT titled, Printer Queue Jam in Conference Room A. It would reroute all system attention to the printer server, buying me 20 minutes of blind spot. Fourth move, purge logs. The whole thing took less than 4 minutes. By the time Brandon walked past my desk an hour later, tossing another smug look my way, the gears had already turned. I was no longer reacting to their humiliation. I was harvesting it. He thought he'd won. That I was still in shock, still processing his words. But I wasn't. I was counting down. It started with $312.14. Not enough to raise a flag. Just enough to cause irritation. A miscalculation in the Q2 logistics budget, attributed to rounding inconsistencies. Sandra from HR flagged it in passing during a Slack conversation that no one read all the way through. It was dismissed with a shrug and a joke about the joys of legacy accounting software. 2 days later, $481.97 disappeared from the petty cash reimbursements ledger. That one showed up as a duplicate reimbursement for a warehouse safety seminar that hadn't happened since 2019. Again, shrugged off, filed as an internal systems artifact. I could almost hear them patting themselves on the back for using such fancy language to explain away their own incompetence. I watched it unfold from my corner desk, face blank, typing nonsense into a spreadsheet no one would ever open. Every entry I made was a signal. Every email I sent a misdirection. I moved like I was defeated, like I hadn't already started draining their tank with a straw so thin they couldn't feel the bleed. Accounting began to whisper. It always starts there. The numbers people. They don't gossip like normal folks. They trade suspicions in code. Was the Q4 reconciliation signed yet? I swear that vendor ID wasn't in last month's ledger. Anyone know what Project Solomon even is? And the best one. Quietly uttered over reheated pasta salad at a Thursday lunch. Where the hell is this money going? Nobody had answers. Because the money didn't go anywhere obvious. I didn't touch payroll. That would have gotten messy. I didn't touch executive bonuses. That would have lit up red alerts. I siphoned from the waste. Training budgets that were already bloated. Travel expenses nobody verified. Subscriptions to analytics services no one used but kept renewing. Paper cuts. Death by 1,000 untraceable expenses. Brandon, for a while, didn't even notice. He was too busy doing what he always did, playing CEO on LinkedIn and Instagram, posting pseudo-inspirational quotes about resilience, while micromanaging every person beneath him like a bored dictator with a god complex. But paranoia has a smell, and soon it was leaking out of his cologne-soaked pores. He started hovering more, asking department heads to just walk me through their budgets like a concerned dad who suddenly remembered his kid has a science fair project due tomorrow. He rewrote emails twice before sending them. Spent 2 hours in the server room pretending he understood how permissions worked. Popped into HR meetings with that fake relaxed tone that always means someone's about to get fired. The irony was delicious. Because while he was spinning in circles, trying to trace ghosts in his financials, I was sitting 10 feet away sipping burnt coffee and typing formulas into cells that didn't matter. He never suspected me. Why would he? I was just the guy who still showed up. The loser who kept working after the 75-cent paycheck. The dog who'd learned to beg for scraps and smile while doing it. I kept my face neutral. No smirks. No gloating. Just dull-eyed compliance. But inside, I was savoring every dollar. Every spreadsheet error. Every late-night email chain that ended in "we'll look into it." Because they were looking everywhere. Except at the man they thought had already lost. On Monday at 9:17 a.m., the number jumped to $23,904. By 11 a.m., it was $138,000. By lunch, the internal system reported a loss of over $1.2 million across 12 separate accounts, assets, liquidity pools, and foreign vendor disbursements, all tagged pending reconciliation. That phrase would become infamous. Phones rang. Not office phones, private phones. Executive lines. Investor cells. Brandon's face turned from tan to chalk before the first call even ended. By the time the third client asked to schedule a high-priority emergency call, he was already sweating through his tailored jacket. A storm was rolling in, and the man had shown up wearing sunglasses and a smirk. The internal audit team tried to isolate the cause. Too late. The ghost I'd unleashed was built to multiply. Every transaction mirrored itself with just enough lag to look like latency, then looped through offshore vendor accounts created 6 months prior. Accounts seeded with purchase histories, dummy addresses, even phone support. If you weren't looking closely and quickly, you'd think the money was cycling through regular channels. But it wasn't. It was being bled out. And I was watching it all from my corner, silent as a priest at a funeral. Brandon snapped by mid-afternoon, slammed a whiteboard to the floor in the finance bullpen, barked something about sabotage and moles. Fired 2 junior accountants on the spot, one of them literally crying, the other 2 stunned to speak. His tantrum echoed across the floor like gunshots in a school hallway. Then came the emergency meeting. He walked in shaking, trying to keep control of the narrative. "We're dealing with a temporary irregularity," he said, voice brittle and oily. "The systems are just flagging false positives." Sandra from HR, who knew better, raised her hand. "Are they false? Or are they gone?" He snapped. "You think I don't know what I'm doing?" No one responded. Because they didn't. Not anymore. The staff began pulling back. Co-workers I'd known for years now whispered in huddles near bathroom doors, questioning whether their retirement funds were safe. IT wiped servers in blind panic, chasing shadows that didn't exist. Legal tried to freeze all outbound transfers, but the damage was already done. The clock couldn't be turned back. And me? I was the ghost in the machine. Untouched. Unnoticed. Every fake mistake, every small mislabel, every clerical error, now roared like a forest fire. And I just stood in the middle of the smoke, eyes dry, heart steady, watching the empire he built on ego and exploitation collapse plank by flaming plank. There was a moment, brief, flickering, when Brandon looked straight at me from across the office, eyes wide with something close to fear, like his subconscious had finally tugged the thread. But he said nothing. Because to acknowledge me would be to acknowledge how long I'd been watching. How easily I could see what he couldn't. I turned back to my screen, sipped my coffee, and smiled, just barely. Just once. They were still trying to find a cause. Still assuming it was a bug. Not AMANWY Thursday morning. The office felt like a hospital waiting room where everyone already knew the diagnosis, but no one wanted to say the word cancer out loud. HR held 3 emergency meetings before lunch. 2 were labeled confidential, and one was so hastily assembled that the projector still displayed a screensaver of tropical fish while Sandra tried to stammer her way through phrases like financial irregularities, third-party forensic audit, and the real kicker, potential bankruptcy proceedings. The staff was crumbling. People stopped making eye contact in the hall. The espresso machine stopped working, and no one bothered fixing it. Even Mike from Inbound, the guy who once survived a forklift collision with nothing but a neck brace and a thumbs up, looked like he was ready to weep over his 401k. And Brandon? Brandon was unraveling in real time. He'd stopped shaving. His ties no longer matched his shirts. He paced the office like a coked-up ghost, calling people into his glass-walled office one by one for talks that ended with whispered arguments, slammed folders, and on one occasion, a very audible, "Then go. We don't need dead weight." It was around 3:30 p.m. when he called me in. I walked into his office with the same expression I'd worn for the last 4 years. Neutral, slightly tired, completely unthreatening. He closed the door behind me with a soft click, and when I turned around, he was already glaring. I know it's you. No hello. No preamble. Just venom. I tilted my head. Sorry. He leaned over the desk, his hands gripping the edge like he was afraid he might fly apart if he didn't anchor himself. Don't play dumb. You've had access to the systems for years. You've worked late. You know everything. You think I don't see that? I blinked. See what? His jaw twitched. Don't insult me. I'm not, I said softly. I'm just not sure what you're accusing me of. His mouth opened then closed. He was trying to muster the swagger that used to come so easily, but it wasn't there anymore. It was a costume that no longer fit. You're going to help fix this, he said, but there was no authority in his voice now. Just desperation layered over a last shred of ego. You're going to go into the system and find the leak. Clean it. Patch it. Before this whole place goes under. I let the silence hang. Then slowly I nodded. Of course, I said. Happy to help. The look on his face, God, it was art. Because in that moment, he didn't know if I was sincere or mocking him. Didn't know if I was the drowning man tossing him a rope, or the one holding his head underwater. I leaned forward slightly. Just send me whatever credentials I need. I'll get started tonight. He swallowed hard. It was the first time I'd seen fear in his eyes. Not paranoia. Not anger. Fear. Because the power shift was complete, and he knew it. He was no longer the man who controlled my paycheck. He was the man who'd publicly humiliated the only person who could stop the bleeding, and he had no idea whether I'd bother. I left his office calm, measured, my expression carefully blank. Inside, though, I was grinning. Not because I'd won, but because he finally knew he'd lost. The headlines dropped on a Friday morning like thunder in a soundproof room. Local logistics firm under investigation for financial misconduct. $9.4 million unaccounted for. SEC FBI probe into Midwestern tech distributor begins. Systematic internal sabotage suspected. No one made coffee that day. No one even spoke above a whisper. The news spread faster than the toner ink drying on the printed memos HR tried desperately to distribute. Screens were filled with articles. Phones buzzed nonstop. Clients pulled contracts. Partners paused funding. Employees opened LinkedIn tabs in silent unison like prey sensing blood in the water. I watched from my desk, still in my chair. Fingers idle on the keyboard of a computer I no longer needed to touch. I wasn't logged into anything. I didn't have to be. The work was done. Around 10:42 a.m., the elevator dinged, and two men in black jackets stepped out with practiced neutrality. Not police. Not mal cops. Private security. The kind you hire when you want things to end quietly, but with just enough force that everyone gets the message. They walked straight to Brandon's office. It was over in less than 4 minutes. No shouting. No last-minute monologue. Just paper files swept into a cardboard box, a laptop bag zipped shut, and a hollow-eyed man escorted through the office he once ruled like a petty god. We all watched. The entire floor. Silent. Not in protest, but in awe. He didn't look at us. He didn't speak. His eyes were locked on the floor, like maybe if he didn't see us, we wouldn't exist. But we did. I did. He passed the break room. The same one where he once smirked and told me I should be grateful for scraps. The same spot where the coffee machine hissed and whispered my humiliation to the crowd that never spoke up. And now, that same crowd stood by the coffee machine, motionless. Watching. No laughter. No pity. Just the dull silence of people witnessing the justice they never believed would arrive. As the doors closed behind him, someone finally broke the quiet. A single whisper. Holy shit. I stood and stretched. The air felt heavier now, like something had been pulled from the room. Or maybe exorcised. The HR director followed soon after. Tears in her eyes, phone pressed to her ear, mouthing, I didn't know to no one in particular. By noon, the company was officially on lockdown. Legal teams arrived. All systems restricted. Forensic audits launched. Emails halted. The CEO issued a statement via an emergency Zoom from some sun-drenched resort thousands of miles away. We are cooperating fully with authorities and will pursue all internal leads. I laughed quietly to myself, because I was the internal lead. And I was already gone. Not physically, but free, unbound. The humiliation hadn't vanished. The memory of that 75 cents per hour pay stub still burned in my bones. But revenge wasn't about erasing pain. It was about balancing the scale. And the scale was leveled now. Maybe even tipped. Just enough. Cold triumph settled in my chest like snowpack. Heavy, quiet, final. I didn't speak to anyone that day. I didn't gloat. I just sipped my coffee, no longer burnt, strangely sweet, and watched an empire burn down without ever having to lift a match. On Monday morning, I came in early. Not out of habit. Not because I had anything left to do, but because I wanted to walk those hallways one last time while the walls still remembered who built the trap. The lights were flickering in half the building. IT had shut down all remote access and was busy gutting the server infrastructure, like pulling the wiring from a house that had already burned down. The printer room reeked of burnt plastic and anxiety. Desks sat abandoned mid-task, coffee cups still warm, chairs still crooked. No one dared sit anymore. Everyone was waiting for the next shoe to drop. A list of layoffs. A federal knock. A statement to the press that never came. No one noticed me. I sat at my desk, emptied my drawer, one mug, a USB I'd already wiped, a notebook filled with doodles and decoy meeting notes. I left behind the mousepad Brandon gave the staff last year. It read, "Hustle hard. Let harder." The irony made me chuckle. Quietly, I walked down to the break room one last time. The coffee machine, that eternal witness, hummed softly as if it too were waiting for someone to tell it what the hell just happened. Sarah from packing stood by it, holding her cup like a shield. She glanced up at me, then looked away too quickly. I could feel it. The shift. The guy they once pitied? He had become something else. I said nothing. Just poured one last cup. Let the silence stretch. Then I left. No announcement. No, it's been a pleasure. No revenge speech on the stairwell or cryptic post on company Slack. I didn't owe them spectacle. I'd already given them the performance of a lifetime, behind the scenes, in the shadows, 1 decimal point at a time. As I stepped outside, I glanced back once. Brandon's car spot sat empty. His name had been quietly scraped off the parking placard. Word was he'd been blacklisted across 3 finance boards. His name was poison now, synonymous with internal collapse and negligent oversight. No one would hire him. No one would return his calls. And no one, absolutely no one, was going to believe that the guy he humiliated was capable of pulling the trigger. But I didn't need them to believe. I just needed them to remember. He paid me 75 cents an hour. In return, I charged him $1.2 million every hour until there was nothing left. No confession. No trail. No applause. Just a man walking away from ruins no one saw him build. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a silence that follows you home and stays.